The cold air hit Uriel's face as she stepped out of the sleek black car and onto the icy driveway. Her breath came out in quick puffs, fogging the air around her. Her hands were numb, her fingers stiff from holding onto the grocery bags that weighed heavily in her arms. She hadn't expected to be greeted by this. Christmas Eve, the most joyous night of the year, and yet, here she stood, outside her in-laws' mansion, the snow swirling around her in a cold, indifferent dance. The lights on the estate flickered like distant stars, but nothing could warm her. She had just wanted to make things right, to prove to her husband, Kyun, and his family that she belonged. She wanted to surprise them with a perfect Christmas dinner, the kind that would make them see her as more than just an outsider. She had gone out alone in the cold to buy all the ingredients she needed for a grand holiday feast, hoping to erase the tension that had been building in their household. She wanted to show them, once again, how much she cared. But now, as she stood at the door of their massive mansion, it felt as if her world had shattered into 1,000 cold, jagged pieces. Oriel pushed open the door, her heart in her throat. The scent of Christmas pine and cinnamon should have greeted her, but instead, a chill ran down her spine. Her suitcases were already lined up in the foyer, neatly arranged like soldiers ready to escort her out. Her heart pounded. What was going on? And then, the voice of her mother-in-law, Gina, cut through the silence, sharp and unforgiving. Adulteress. Her mother-in-law's voice rang in her ears like a bell, and the word echoed through her mind. How dare you bring that bastard child into our home? Oriel froze, her blood running cold. The grocery bag slipped from her fingers, apples and ribbons spilling out onto the marble floor. Her body refused to move. The world around her spun, and for a second, it felt like she was outside her own body, watching as the people she had tried so hard to win overturned against her. How dare you bring that bastard child into our home? Her mother-in-law repeated, her words like stones, each one a blow. Her voice was thick with disgust, her eyes cutting into Oriel like a knife. Her eyes scanned Oriel's rounded belly. Her mother-in-law's face twisted with contempt. Her breath hitched as the rest of the family joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of accusations. Her brother-in-law, Un, sneered at her, eyes narrowed with judgment. Shameless woman, he spat. Disgusting. We should have known better than to trust someone like you. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. She had no idea what was happening. What had they seen? She hadn't done anything wrong. She had never cheated on Kyun, but nothing she said could change their minds. Her world was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do. She tried to speak, to beg them to understand. I don't know what you're talking about. Please believe me, I would never. Her words were drowned out by the rising chorus of insults, the cruel accusations that tumbled from her in-laws' mouths like poison. And then there was Kyun. He didn't shout like the others. He didn't accuse her or throw her out. He just looked at her, cold, emotionless. His eyes no longer held any trace of the love they once shared. He stared at her like she was a stranger. Her knees wobbled as she stumbled forward, hands clutching her belly. Please, she whispered, her voice shaking. Please, I swear, on everything holy, I don't remember that night. But they didn't care. Nothing she said could undo the damage that had been done. Her father-in-law, Jean, stepped forward with a phone in his hand, his face twisted with anger. We know everything, he said, his voice cold and final. You thought you could hide it. He held up the phone, and Uriel's heart dropped into her stomach. The screen showed grainy hotel footage, the kind that made her stomach churn. It was from exactly 7 months ago. The dimly lit room. Her. Naked. Entangled in the sheets with a shadowed stranger. The stranger's face was hidden, but it didn't matter. Uriel's blood ran cold. It was her. She couldn't deny it. But how could this be real? She didn't remember that night. She remembered being at a business event with her sister, so young. She remembered drinking too much. After that, everything was a blur. She had woken up the next morning, fully clothed, her head pounding, confused. Her sister had sent her home in a taxi. But how had she ended up here, tangled with some man she didn't know? Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone, desperate to explain. I don't remember, she whispered. I was drunk. I thought I just passed out. I didn't sleep with anyone. I swear. But no one listened. The names they called her stung like knives. Liar. Her father-in-law yelled. Disgrace. Her mother-in-law spat. Her legs gave way, and she crumpled to the floor, clutching her belly. Tears streamed down her face as her sobs filled the cold, empty house. Please, she begged again, voice barely a whisper. Please, I didn't do it. I swear I didn't. Kyun didn't say a word. He didn't defend her. His cold eyes stared at her like a stranger, like she was nothing to him. Get out of my house, he said, his voice so calm, so final, that Uriel felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. I don't want you here anymore. Her chest tightened, her heart breaking as the reality of her situation hit her. They were kicking her out. The family she had given everything to. The family she had worked so hard to prove herself to. They were throwing her out. Alone. Pregnant. With trembling hands, she grabbed her suitcase, her body shaking from the cold. They pushed her out the door, her suitcases falling to the ground with a thud. She stumbled into the snow, her breath catching in her throat as she looked back at the mansion. The door slammed shut behind her, and the cold, biting wind cut through her thin coat. Her heart broke into 1,000 pieces as the tears froze on her cheeks. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Her own family wouldn't believe her. Her husband had turned his back on her. The only thing she had was the baby growing inside her. And that thought, that small, fragile piece of hope, was the only thing that kept her standing. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number of her younger sister, so young. She needed help. She needed someone who believed her. But in her grief and confusion, she sent the message to the wrong number. The phone in her hand buzzed, and she stared at the screen. A message from an unknown number. She didn't realize her mistake until it was too late. Across the city, Cho Yong-soo, the youngest and most feared Korean mafia boss in all of Seoul, stared at his phone in disbelief. The message he had just received wasn't a plea from some woman begging for money or favors. No, this message was different. This woman, desperate and broken, was telling her story. Her voice, even through the phone, sounded raw and vulnerable. And as the words sank in, something dangerous stirred in him. He had no idea who she was. He had no idea what had happened. But one thing was clear. She needed help. And Cho Yong-soo never turned away someone in need, especially not someone who had been wronged. He looked at the screen again, his lips curling into a cold, calculating smile. He would find her. Uriel's body shook uncontrollably as she stumbled through the snow, her suitcase dragging behind her. The cold burned her skin like 1,000 needles, but it was nothing compared to the weight in her chest. She could still hear the insults echoing in her mind, see the cold, heartless faces of her in-laws, and feel the emptiness where Kyun's love had once been. The snow crunched beneath her boots with every step, but it was all muffled by the raging storm inside her heart. Her phone was still clutched tightly in her hand, but it was no use. She had sent her plea for help to the wrong number, who would even answer a message from a stranger in the middle of the night. She stopped for a moment, her breath shallow as she looked around, her eyes scanning the silent streets. Everything was quiet, too quiet. She could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears, feel the cold seep into her bones. The world felt like it had stopped, and she was alone in the middle of it all.
No.
She couldn't let herself break.
Not now.
Not when her baby needed her. Her hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly, a small gesture of protection. She needed to survive this. For her child. She didn't know how long she stood there in the snow, but when she looked up, the city around her seemed different. A strange feeling crept over her, a sense that someone was watching her. She shook it off, rubbing her eyes to clear the tears that had begun to cloud her vision. She started walking again, slower this time, trying to gather her thoughts. She couldn't go back to the mansion. She couldn't face her family like this. But where could she go? Her mind drifted back to earlier that evening. Everything had started out so hopeful. The day had been bright with the promise of family, love, and a perfect Christmas. She had spent hours in the kitchen, making sure every dish was perfect, every ingredient just right. She had gone out in the cold, against the wind, to gather the last of the groceries. It had been important to her, this one last effort to show her family that she was worth their love and acceptance. She had been so sure, so ready to prove herself. But now, it felt like the world had been ripped from under her feet. She thought of Kyun, her husband, the man she had given everything to. They had built a life together, shared dreams, hopes, and promises. And yet, tonight, he had looked at her as if she were a stranger, as if the love they once shared meant nothing. The way he turned his back on her, cold and distant, left her breathless. She had never been enough for his family, never good enough. She had always tried so hard to fit in, to prove that she belonged. She had learned their ways, their traditions, even their language. But it was never enough. And now here she was cast out, pregnant, and abandoned. Her hands tightened on her suitcase handle as the bitter wind swept around her. Her eyes, red from crying, scanned the horizon. She had to keep moving.
Keep going.
She couldn't stay in this city. Not now, not like this. Her phone buzzed again, and she jumped, startled. It was the unknown number, the one she had accidentally sent her message to. The words on the screen caught her off guard. "I got your message." The cold crept through her like ice water, freezing her where she stood. Who was this person? She hadn't recognized the number before, but the message was clear. She had someone's attention now. But what did that mean for her? "I can help you." The words sent a chill down her spine. She stared at the screen for a long time, her heart pounding in her chest. Could she trust this stranger? Could she risk it? There was nothing left for her in the world of her in-laws and Kyun. They had shown her no mercy. The thought of reaching out to this unknown person was terrifying, but it was also the only option she had left. 100 thoughts raced through her mind. What would she do? She had no home, no family, no support. Only this message. She typed a quick response, her fingers trembling. "Who are you?" The reply came swiftly. "That's not important. What matters is that you need help." Uriel's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of what to type next. The last thing she wanted was to drag someone else into her problems. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her child. "I need to get away," she typed. "I have nowhere to go." Her heart was pounding now. The reply came again, chilling in its certainty. "Come to me." The message was so direct, so commanding, that Uriel couldn't help but feel a strange sense of urgency. This person was dangerous, she knew that much. But she was desperate. She couldn't stay out here, in the cold, with nothing left but a suitcase and her unborn child. She hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. Was this a mistake? Would this stranger be her savior? Or her doom? Another message came through, this time with an address. "Come now. You're safe with me." Uriel's heart raced as she stared at the address. The location was far from where she was, in an unfamiliar part of the city. But she didn't have a choice. Her hand was already reaching for her phone, her mind made up. She needed to leave. She typed back, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm coming." The phone buzzed again. A final message. "Good. Don't keep me waiting." Uriel slipped her phone into her coat pocket and looked around, her eyes scanning the empty street. The city was silent, as if it were holding its breath. The air was thick with tension, and Uriel's chest felt tight. But there was no going back now. She picked up her suitcase, ignoring the pain in her body, and started walking. Her legs felt weak, but she couldn't stop. She had no idea where she was going or who she was walking toward, but she had to move. For her child. For herself. As she walked, the cold seemed to intensify, biting at her skin. The night was darker now, the snow falling heavier, covering the streets in a blanket of white. Every step felt heavier than the last, but Uriel pushed forward, determined to make it to the place where she hoped she could find some kind of safety. Her mind was a blur, the thoughts swirling around her like the snowflakes that danced in the wind. She had no idea what kind of help she was about to walk into, but she had to trust that it was the only chance she had left. And then, just as she thought she couldn't take another step, a black car pulled up beside her, its engine purring like a predator in the night. The window rolled down, revealing the face of a man. His eyes were dark and unreadable, his face cold and emotionless. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the car, as if expecting her to get in. Uriel stood frozen, her heart racing in her chest. She had no idea who this man was, or if she could trust him. But there was no time to hesitate. Her instincts screamed at her to get in, to follow this man, to go wherever he would take her. She had no other choice. She opened the door and stepped inside. The car door slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. The man in the front seat didn't say a word as the car started moving, pulling away from the curb and into the night. And Uriel, pregnant and broken, had no idea what kind of world she was about to enter. The sleek black car glided through the empty streets of Seoul, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. Uriel sat in the back, her eyes fixed on the darkened window, unable to look away from the cold city outside. Every passing building, every turn of the car felt like she was sinking deeper into a world she didn't understand, a world she wasn't sure she wanted to be a part of. The man in the front seat hadn't spoken a word since they left the street corner. His eyes were locked on the road, his face expressionless, as though this was all just business as usual. But to Uriel, it felt like anything but. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything in her life was spiraling out of control. She had been kicked out of her home on Christmas Eve, her family had turned against her, and now she was in a car with a stranger who might be more dangerous than she could comprehend. But what choice did she have? The car moved like a shadow through the city, taking her farther from everything she had known, farther from the family that had rejected her, farther from the life she had built. She wasn't sure where she was going, but the message from the man who had answered her desperate plea for help echoed in her mind. "Come to me. You're safe with me." Safe? The word seemed almost laughable now. She wasn't sure if anything in this strange, dark world could be called safe. But as the car sped through the empty streets, Uriel found herself clinging to that word, desperate for something, anything, to hold on to. The car slowed as they entered a part of the city Uriel didn't recognize. The buildings grew taller, the streets narrower, and the lights dimmer. This wasn't the part of the city where she had lived, where she had tried to fit in, to prove herself worthy of love and acceptance. This was something else entirely. The car came to a stop in front of a high-rise building, its sleek, modern exterior gleaming even in the dim light. It was a world away from the mansion she had been thrown out of, a world of sharp edges, glass, and steel. The driver didn't say a word as he opened the door and stepped out, his movements precise, as if this was all part of some routine. Uriel stepped out of the car hesitantly, her knees weak, her mind spinning. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she had no choice but to follow. The driver didn't wait for her to make up her mind. He led her toward the building, and Uriel walked, unsure of where her feet were taking her, her eyes darting nervously between the driver and the door ahead. They entered the building through a set of glass doors that slid open silently, revealing a sleek, minimalist lobby. The walls were made of dark marble, the floors polished to a shine. There were no decorations, no warmth, just cold elegance. Uriel's stomach twisted as she followed the driver into an elevator, the doors closing behind her with a soft whoosh. The elevator moved quickly, and Uriel felt the tension building in her chest. She tried to steady her breath, but it was impossible. Every second felt like an eternity, the silence between her and the driver only adding to the mounting unease. When the elevator stopped, the door slid open to reveal a hallway that was just as cold and sleek as the lobby. The driver led her down the hall, his footsteps silent on the marble floor. At the end of the hallway, a set of double doors opened, and Uriel was ushered into a large, open space. It was a penthouse apartment, and it looked like something out of a dream. The walls were floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city below, its lights sparkling like stars. The furniture was minimalist but luxurious. Black leather sofas, sleek glass tables, and polished metal accents. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of the city lights outside. Uriel felt small in the space, overwhelmed by the starkness of it all. This was a world she didn't belong to. It was a world of power, of money, of people who had everything she didn't. She tried to steady herself, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly, as if that simple gesture could anchor her in a reality that was slipping further away. From the shadows in the far corner of the room, a figure stepped forward. Uriel's breath caught in her throat as she recognized him instantly. Cho Yong-soo, the man whose message had drawn her here. The Mafia boss. The man whose reputation struck fear into the hearts of even the most powerful in Seoul. He was taller than she had imagined, his frame broad and imposing. His eyes, dark and intense, seemed to pierce through her, reading her every thought. His face was sharp, his features chiseled as if carved from stone, and there was a dangerous energy about him that made the air in the room feel thick, heavy. Uriel felt a shiver run down her spine. She was face to face with a man who had the power to destroy lives with a single word. And yet, there was something about him that kept her from running. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, with an intensity that almost seemed to recognize her pain. "Sit," he said, his voice calm, yet commanding. He gestured toward one of the sofas, his eyes never leaving hers. Uriel hesitated for a moment, then slowly made her way toward the seat. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy and unyielding, as she sank into the plush cushions. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the seat, her heart racing in her chest. What was he going to do? Why had he brought her here? Yong-soo didn't sit. Instead, he stood across from her, his hands tucked into the pockets of his black coat, his posture relaxed but still alert. "You've had a rough night," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, though his words carried weight. "But you're safe now." Uriel didn't know what to make of his words. Safe? She had been safe once. But now? Now, everything was a mess. She had no idea who this man was, or what his intentions were. But she couldn't deny the strange sense of relief that washed over her. For the first time that night, she wasn't completely alone. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't even know me." Yong-soo's lips curled into a slight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't need to know you to see that you've been wronged. And when someone wrongs a person under my protection, they answer to me." Uriel's mind raced. Protection? What did that even mean? She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could form the words, he raised a hand, silencing her. "I know about the video," he said, his voice cold and steady. "I know about your family, and I know that you're not guilty of what they accused you of." Uriel froze. She couldn't speak. How did he know all of this? Who was this man, really? He took a step forward, his eyes locked on hers. "I don't need you to explain anything. I'm here to help you, and I will. But I need to know that you trust me." Uriel's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She had never been good at trusting strangers, especially not ones with power like this. But right now, she didn't have a choice. She looked into his eyes, seeing the cold fire burning there, the promise of something more than just help. Something darker. Something that could change everything. I trust you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yong-soo nodded slowly. Good, he said, his voice low. Because what happens next is going to change everything for both of us. And with those words, Oriel knew that her life would never be the same again. The morning after Oriel arrived at the penthouse was cold and still. The winter sun filtered weakly through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows over the sleek furniture. The city below was waking up, but inside the penthouse, there was only silence. Oriel lay in a guest room that felt too big for her, surrounded by soft linens and warmth that she hadn't felt in days. The weight of the blanket felt foreign, comforting, yet suffocating in its stillness. She hadn't slept well. Her mind kept drifting to the events of the night before, to the cold, empty mansion she'd left behind, to the family that had thrown her out without a second thought. The echoes of her mother-in-law's voice, the accusations, the cruelty, still rang in her ears. The video, that damn video. It haunted her, replaying in her mind every time she closed her eyes. The bed was too soft, too comfortable. Every time she closed her eyes, her body fought the rest she desperately needed, and her mind refused to let go of the images of what had happened the night she had become a prisoner to her own shame. Her fingers grazed over her swollen belly, the life inside her stirring. The only thing that kept her from completely losing herself was the baby. For the baby, she thought, I have to survive this. She had spent her entire life working to earn her place in the world, to earn the love of her husband, Kyun, and his family. She had worked hard to learn their language, their customs, even to suppress her own identity in favor of their world. She had been trying for years to prove that she belonged. And now, after everything, she had been discarded like yesterday's trash. The phone that had sent her into this new world buzzed on the bedside table. It startled her, breaking the silence that had consumed her thoughts. She reached for it hesitantly, her hands trembling. The message was from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. We need to talk. It was from the man who had sent her that first message, the man who had taken her in, the man whose world she had entered without understanding the danger. Cho Yong-soo, the Mafia boss. She had barely had time to process what had happened the night before, but there was no mistaking the certainty in his words. He had made it clear that she was in his world now. Uriel took a deep breath. This was it. The man who could make or break her future. But what did he want from her now? She had no choice but to answer. She typed a quick reply. What do you want from me? The reply came almost immediately. Meet me in the study. We need to discuss what happens next. A cold shiver ran down her spine. The study? She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was just past 9 a.m. She hadn't heard him move through the apartment, but she had no doubt that he was already awake, waiting, watching. That was the way of men like him, wasn't it? Always in control. Always one step ahead. She slowly got out of bed, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. As she stood up, her body protested, aching in places she hadn't noticed before. But it didn't matter. She had to keep moving. She couldn't let herself get lost in this feeling of vulnerability, not when the stakes were so high. Uriel moved to the mirror on the wall and looked at her reflection. The woman who stared back at her was a stranger. Her skin was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. But beneath the exhaustion, beneath the pain, she could still see the woman who had once been full of hope, full of life. That woman hadn't been kicked out of her own home. That woman hadn't been betrayed. She shook her head, pushing the thoughts aside. The past was the past. She had to focus on the now, on the present. The future was uncertain, and every step she took from here on out could be a step toward redemption, or further into darkness. She dressed quickly, slipping into the new clothes that had been left for her, a soft cream sweater and wide-legged pants. They were simple, but they fit her perfectly. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled them on, but she steadied herself. She wasn't just dressing for comfort anymore. She was dressing for survival. When she opened the door, the hallway outside was empty, the silence heavy. Uriel's footsteps echoed in the space as she walked toward the study, the floor beneath her cold and unforgiving. As she reached the door, she hesitated, her hand on the handle. What was she walking into? What did this man want from her? And why had he brought her into his world in the first place? She didn't have answers. Not yet. But she knew one thing for certain. She was going to find out. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The study was just as cold and imposing as the rest of the penthouse. It was sparsely furnished, with dark wood paneling, a massive desk, and rows of bookshelves that lined the walls. The only light in the room came from the city lights outside, casting long shadows across the room. And then there was Cho Yong-soo, sitting behind the desk, his eyes locked on her as she entered. He didn't rise from his seat, didn't greet her. He simply watched her, his gaze steady and calculating, as if he were waiting for her to make the first move. Uriel's heart raced. She had no idea what to say to him. Finally, he broke the silence. "I've been looking into your situation," he said, his voice low, cold. "What happened to you last night was no accident. Someone set you up. Someone wanted you to be humiliated. And I'm going to find out who." Uriel's breath hitched. She hadn't been imagining it. There was something bigger behind all of this. Something she couldn't see yet. Yong-soo leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "But before we get into that, I need to know one thing from you, Uriel." She met his gaze, trying to steady her nerves. "What? Do you want justice?" he asked, his voice still cold, but there was a steel edge to it. "Do you want revenge on those who have wronged you?" Uriel's mind raced. Her body felt as though it were frozen in place. Revenge? Was that what she wanted? She thought of her in-laws, of Kyun, of the family she had given everything to. The anger swelled inside her, dark and bitter. How could they do this to her? How could they turn on her so easily? For a moment, she thought of saying yes. Yes, she wanted revenge. She wanted them to feel the pain she had felt. She wanted to make them pay. But then, she thought of her baby, the small life growing inside her, and the future that she still had to protect. Her mind cleared, and she took a deep breath, the decision settling inside her like a stone. "I want justice," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I don't want revenge, but I want to know the truth. I want to know who did this to me and why." Yong-soo studied her for a moment, his gaze piercing. Finally, he nodded. "Good," he said. "The truth is a powerful thing, and once we find it, there's no going back." Uriel didn't know what he meant by that, but she had a feeling she was about to find out. The day after Uriel's conversation with Cho Yong-soo, the air in the penthouse felt charged, like a storm was brewing on the horizon. She had agreed to help him, to follow his lead in uncovering the truth behind the betrayal she had suffered, but every step she took seemed to lead her deeper into a world she was not prepared for. She had spent hours that morning pacing the room, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The anger from the night before still burned inside her, mingling with confusion and fear. Who was she becoming in this strange world, and what would the cost be to seek justice for herself? She had never imagined that her life would spiral so quickly into chaos. The soft hum of the city outside the penthouse window had become a constant backdrop to her thoughts, but it couldn't drown out the uncertainty gnawing at her. The man who had taken her in, who had promised to protect her, was someone she didn't understand. There was so much about him, about this entire world, that she had yet to learn. But despite the unease, There was one thing she knew for sure. Cho Yong-soo was not a man who made empty promises. And if he said he would help her find the truth, she had no doubt he would do everything in his power to make that happen. Whether that truth would be one she could live with, however, was another matter entirely. She sat down at the sleek glass table in the kitchen area, absently staring at the untouched cup of tea in front of her. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. A message. She picked it up and unlocked it, her heart skipping a beat as she read the words. Meet me in the garage. We're leaving. Oriel felt a lump form in her throat. The message was from Yong-soo, and it was clear. There was no time for hesitation now. The investigation was beginning, and whatever lay ahead, she was in it, whether she liked it or not. She stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. The reality of what was happening, the truth she was about to face, hit her all over again. What had she gotten herself into? Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and slipped her phone into her pocket. She moved quickly through the penthouse, trying to suppress the rising sense of panic in her chest. This was her life now, for better or worse. She couldn't back out. The garage was a stark contrast to the warm, soft spaces she had been in before. The concrete floor was cold beneath her feet, and the walls were lined with luxury vehicles that gleamed under the harsh overhead lights. But it was the man standing near the far end of the garage that drew her attention. Yong-soo. He was leaning against a sleek black car, his posture relaxed, but there was something about him that radiated power, something dangerous. His eyes were fixed on her as she approached, and for a moment, Oriel felt like she was walking into the lion's den. You're here, he said, his voice steady. He didn't move to greet her or offer any pleasantries. Instead, his eyes seemed to appraise her as if trying to measure her readiness. Oriel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She didn't know what she was supposed to feel or say. All she knew was that she had no other choice but to follow him. He opened the passenger door of the car for her, and Oriel hesitated for a moment, her heart hammering in her chest. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like an invitation into something deeper, darker than she was prepared for. She had no idea where they were going, what they were about to uncover, or what consequences this could bring. But she had to take the first step. For herself.
For her child.
She slid into the car, the leather seat cool beneath her. The door closed softly behind her, sealing her inside, and the engine roared to life. Yong-soo didn't say anything as they drove through the quiet streets of Seoul. The city seemed to blur around them, the buildings and lights melting together in the dark, like a backdrop to the storm that was unfolding in Uriel's life. She tried to steady her breath, but every turn of the car, every moment that brought her closer to wherever they were headed, made her heart beat faster. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the car came to a stop. Uriel looked out the window, seeing nothing but the looming outline of a large, gated compound. It was surrounded by high fences, guards standing at attention, and security cameras scanning the perimeter. It was unlike any place Oriel had ever seen, intimidating, cold, and dangerous. Yong-soo stepped out of the car and walked toward the gates without a glance back. Oriel followed, her mind racing. She had no idea what was waiting inside, but the moment she crossed those gates, there was no turning back. The guards barely looked at her as they entered the compound, nodding to Yong-soo as if they recognized him. There was a heavy silence as they walked, the tension palpable. Oriel tried to keep her nerves under control, but the weight of the situation was heavy on her shoulders. They reached a large building in the center of the compound, a stark, modern structure that seemed to rise out of the ground like something from a nightmare. Inside, it was even colder than the garage, sharp lines, metallic surfaces, and a feeling of isolation that hung in the air like smoke. Yong-soo led her down a long hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Oriel's pulse quickened, her anxiety rising with every step. She didn't know what was going to happen here, but she knew it wasn't going to be easy. They reached a door at the end of the hall, and Yong-soo stopped. He didn't open the door right away. Instead, he turned to her, his eyes dark and unreadable. Are you ready? He asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Uriel swallowed hard. For what? He gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. For the truth. Before she could respond, he pushed the door open, revealing a room filled with monitors and computers. A small team of people sat at desks, their eyes glued to the screens in front of them. There was a sense of urgency in the air, and Uriel felt the weight of it immediately. One of the men at the desk looked up as they entered. He was older, his face lined with age and experience, but his eyes were sharp. Yong-soo turned to him. Show her the footage. The man nodded and pressed a button on the console. The room's lights dimmed as the screens flickered to life, showing a series of images and videos. Uriel's stomach lurched as she recognized some of the footage, grainy hotel security footage from the night she couldn't remember. The images were blurry, but unmistakably hers. There she was, drunk, stumbling into a room with a man whose face was hidden. They were both partially undressed, tangled in sheets. She recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. This isn't me, she whispered, but her voice trembled with doubt. Yong-soo's gaze never left the screen. It's you.
But you didn't know what happened that night.
Someone made sure of that. The man at the desk tapped a few keys, and the screen shifted to a new angle. The same hotel, the same night. But now, the footage showed something different. A shadowy figure entering the room after Uriel had passed out. The figure was tall, their movements purposeful, and as they approached her, the screen blurred. It was clear that someone had orchestrated this. Someone had made sure that Uriel was in the position to be filmed, to be humiliated. Uriel's heart raced, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. Who did this? She whispered, her voice shaking.
Why?
Yong-soo's eyes were hard as he turned to her. That's what we're going to find out. But it's going to take time. And you have to be ready for what you'll learn. Uriel nodded, her resolve hardening. She didn't know what the truth would be, but one thing was certain. She wasn't backing down now. She had come this far. She had to see this through. Yong-soo's voice was calm, but his words held a chilling promise. We're going to take down whoever did this to you. And when we do, they'll regret ever crossing us. As the room filled with the sound of the monitors, Uriel took a deep breath. She was no longer the woman who had been cast out into the snow. She was something else now, something stronger, something ready to fight.